Hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel. I'm super excited today to be hosting a live panel with a bunch of 2020 YA Sci-Fi debuts, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, tell us who you are, your whole life story, of course, your book, and I do have links down below in the description to everyone's books. You should buy them, and I'm going to throw you a curveball, and I'm sorry. If there's one thing you could go back in time travel, sci-fi, to tell your pre-debut self, what would it be and why? And I just threw that at you. So who wants to go first? Because I'm a cruel human. Go. I'm sorry.
From Sheena.
Hi, I'm Sheena Boekweg. My book is Glitch Kingdom, which came out in February 18th of 2020, right before the pandemic shut everything down. It is a YA about a bunch of teens who are stuck in a fantasy video game that starts breaking down around them. It's ridiculously fun and kind of a popcorn movie kind of sci-fi. And yes, and I love it. It's really good. And then my next book is coming out actually June 1st. It's a Sisterhood of Secret Ambitions. It is an alternate history set in 1927 about a secret society of women who have influenced the presidential election since John Adams. And there's a group of teenage girls whose job it is to kind of charm a future president. So he's 18 years old, and they're all kind of competing together, but they're also all best friends who help each other. So it's kind of like the Manchurian Candidate meets the Dairy Girls. And it's ridiculously fun. And I hope you guys will add it to Goodreads or whatever you need to do. And I'm also a contributor in Everybody Shines, which comes out in May from Bloomsbury, which is a fat positive anthology. And I have a really fun YA sci-fi story in that. Oh, and the thing I would go back in time to tell my past self is that the people whose judgment you're afraid of won't actually pick up your book. They're never going to read it. So don't worry quite so much about that.
I'll jump in next. I will jump. My name is Rebecca Coffindaffer. I am the author of Crown Chasers. It is a YA space opera. Alicia's got everybody covered. She's like, look.
The real MVP here.
It is a YA space opera about a hotshot, sassy pilot named Alyssa Farshot, who is also the niece of the Emperor of the 1,001 Planets. And when he passes away, she gets caught up in a crown chase to try and compete and see who gets the throne. And she doesn't actually want the throne, but she's kind of wrapped up in all of the imperial politics and shenanigans anyway. And she's got a big buff cinnamon roll engineer named Talmonkey, who I love. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. It's like Star Wars plus Lara Croft with a healthy dose of Starbuck from the rebooted Battlestar Galactica in there. If I could go back and tell my pre-debut self one thing, you don't need to do half the stuff that you think that you need to do to promote this book. That you just pick a few things that make you happy and let the rest go, because it's not gonna affect the world. Just let it go.
So I've got don't worry and let it go. We're going to have a thread of this self-debut advice.
Hi, I am Alechia Dow, and I wrote The Sound of Stars. It is about a rebel librarian and a music-loving alien. I always have a hard time pitching books. I'm so sorry. A music-loving alien on a road trip to possibly save humanity, and it's a love letter to books, music, humanity. It's really, really fun, and I think everybody should give it a go if that's your thing. Get it. I also have a book coming out in 2022 called The Kindred, which is basically like if Ben Solo and Rey were not Jedi or, Sith, and then they had this connection and then they were like other people. I'm not doing great on this one either. Okay, so like imagine having a mental connection and they're friends and they're not supposed to be together, and then they crash land to Earth and it's like, what? That's the Kindred, and it's like super fun. And I also am contributing a sci-fi story to Out There, which will come out in 2022, I think, as well. And that's pretty cool. And I guess my thing I would tell myself is do not buy tickets to go to the US to promote your book during a pandemic that you didn't know was going to happen and then waste a lot of money. Because that was super unfun. Not a fan. 10 for 10. Never do that again. That's my advice. Don't do that.
Yeah. 2020, man.
2020. Who'd have thought?
Yep.
Who's next?
So I'll go next. I'm Lora Beth Johnson. I'm the author of Goddess in the Machine, which I don't have next to me, but it's thank you, Alechia, very much. Holding my shoulder, and thank
That's
you,
what
Sheena.
friends are for.
It came out in June. I don't remember. It came out this summer. And
June was 8 years ago. It's fine.
I don't know. It's about a girl who wakes up from cryonic stasis 1,000 years too late into a society that sees technology as magic and worships her as a sleeping goddess. So that happened, and the sequel is coming out this coming summer. I forgot the date again. I don't know. My brain's just not working. But the sequel is called Devil in the Device. And if I could go back and tell myself anything, it would be that you are going to debut in the middle of a pandemic. So like change your expectations. I won't say lower them, just change them.
Yeah. Inserts picture. 2020.
2020 indeed. Okay, I guess I will jump in next. Hi, I am Andrea Tang. I am the author of Rebel Wing, which is behind me somewhere. Alechia, I love you so much. But yeah, with this like fun anime poster looking cover here. Oh gosh, I also get super nervous to this day about doing elevator pitches of my own book. I would actually say that it's almost like if Rebecca's book met Alecia's and had a baby. I feel like that's what my book is, because it's got Alecia's elements of like really kind of being a love story, like I guess like a love letter toward books and media and entertainment and art, because it takes place in this near future version of North America with sort of strictly delineated zones of censorship versus, I guess, like free market consumption of media. And against this backdrop, you have this young teenage girl who's just kind of trying to make her way through life and is in school, but is also smuggling books on the side to make a quick buck, as you do. You got to have your side hustle. Who gets caught up in this like very politically complicated civil war where she gets stuck piloting this like giant sentient robot dragon that she had no intention of encountering, much less like awkwardly having to bond and like ride into warfare. And the plot kind of unfolds from there. In terms of what's next for me, I do have a companion novel set in the same universe that's due out in, I think it was originally February 2021. I think we may have been pushed to March 2021 now, with pandemic time being what it is. It's set like, I think the promo, actually, this is entirely my fault. I think the promo from Razorbill says that it's set 15 years later. I think it's actually something like 12 years later. I just can't do math on character ages. So it like has a whole new like teenage cast, but you do see some cameos / supporting cast members from the original Rebel Wing crew who show up as like late 20, early 30 something adults who are, so you get to see kind of like, it's kind of fun because you get to see like the teenage cast of the original novel as they're like more adult grizzled selves, I suppose. So yeah, that's been a ton of fun. And I've got like a couple of fun secret projects that I don't think I am supposed to talk about quite yet. So that is on the mum. In terms of advice that I would give my pre-debut self, Well, I remember pre-debut, I had like a ton of anxiety about like having to travel to do events like on my own. And I would just tell myself, guess what? Be careful what you wish for, because that thing that you're terrified of doing, you're not actually gonna have to do it. Yeah, I guess like on a more serious note, I will also just jump on the bandwagon and say like, hey, take a chill pill, take a breather. Don't take yourself or this process too seriously. Like, it's gonna be fine, pandemic and all. Like, you're gonna find a way through, and you're gonna find really great people like all of you guys.
Yeah, so I guess I would love just briefly, like, I kind of know how you know each other, but for everyone watching, you guys are YA Sci-Fi debuts from 2020. Talk about how you found each other, and maybe we do talk a little bit about debuting before I have a ton of questions just that are all sci-fi. Like, talk a bit about that, just a little bit, so everyone knows why you're all so cool and friendly.
I think when you're a sci-fi or YA sci-fi, like we have a really good like nose for hunting each other out. And then we're just like, okay, let's form a little, group and like so that we have some support, because it is such it's a smaller subgenre than like fantasy or contemporary. So I think we just kind of sniffed each other out because we knew that we were in that same genre and category.
I also want to give credit to Alechia for for being a community maker here too. I think of like pulling all of us together. Like we all had our separate conversations, I think, but the idea of like really sort of getting into the same space to talk about the unique challenges, not just debuting with this year, but debuting in a smaller subgenre, and like the whole, like there's how many people in our debut class, and of the YAs, this is the sci-fi group. This is the YA sci-fi group. We are mighty, but not big. And so I think that was always going to be a key point. But I think that I have to give credit to Alechia for really like making it more of like a hub.
Yeah, Alechia is definitely, I think, like responsible for this sort of like Avengers Assemble moment, because really put this all together. So like major kudos on that front.
I think it's so important though, because as I'm sure you have already discovered, and enough of you have also heard me complain privately, hopefully on occasion, there's just like stuff only other YA sci-fi writers will get about this. And like to anyone outside, it's like, why are you complaining? You have a book deal. And you're like, you don't understand. It's fine. I'm fine. And so it's nice to have that community. And I'm like, like, y'all are so lucky. Like I had a couple people from 2018, but I wish I'd been smart enough to actually like formally assemble people. I didn't, and I should have. There were slightly more of us, because like we just kind of lost touch over time. And I was like, oh man, we can't even like touch base about like all the other stuff, like options and like all that. Oh, it's a lot. But let's talk happy, super fun times. Like we love sci-fi, obviously. What brought each of you to sci-fi? Like why sci-fi? And then after you like, we'll kind of tack onto that. Like, what was it about the specific debut book that you wrote and the sci-fi tropes that like, why, like you were like this? Let's just talk about why sci-fi is great, basically. Yeah. And anyone can jump in, or we can go in an order. I can point. I'm happy to. People.
I went into sci-fi because I really, 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 really love science fiction. And I kind of grew up always hungry for stories. And sci-fi was the easiest to kind of escape into when I was trying to escape into, from my life. And it was the one area of my public library where nobody was really touching it. So I could go over there and it was like my private space. And X-Men and Star Wars and all of these things felt so unique. And I kind of fell into those stories, and they gave me kind of a home, and they really inspired me. So I was very happy to do it. And I'm so glad to be a part of the community. And and for all of everybody here, Alexa included, I have read all of your books, and I think I read Sheena's, Rebecca's, and Lora Beth's before they even came out because I was so excited, and I just kind of showed up in everybody's DMs, and I was like, so can I read your book? Which is exactly what I said to Lora Beth Johnson. I was like, can I get your book right now? I want to read that. So it's been really, really fun, and I'm glad we have each other, and I'm also glad that we get to represent science fiction for this year in a way, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah. I want to say briefly, it's so critical because this is more of a question. I'll highlight it briefly and we'll come back to it later, that I have said that sci-fi has waves, and we'll come back to the question, but it's true. And I'm like, 5 doesn't feel like a lot for 2020, but I was like, 5, YA Sci-Fi is 2020. Yes, because it's like, we need more. And it's like, you got to keep that
so
going.
Funny. Because like these big breakout crossover YAs are sci-fi. Hunger Games is sci-fi. Divergent is sci-fi. So it's so funny that
dystopia was huge in like the 2010s, and like if you really look at the underpinnings of the world building there, it's all science fiction. It's just a subgenre, right?
It makes me so mad because YA publishing is like, no, that's different. I'm like, how is it different? You tell me sci-fi doesn't sell, and I'm just pointing at the biggest books of the last decade. But okay, publishing, go home, you're drunk. So, yeah, I feel like they'll come around event. They'll figure it out. It's fine. It'll be like, now we say contemporary fantasy instead of urban fantasy. Maybe it just needs a different name.
Well, I think like, because at least Sheena and our books have a fantasy feel to them, because she's combined like the sci-fi like video game technology with the fantasy video game, and I have science as magic. And I think like maybe if we called it science fantasy or something like that, because I love fantasy. So like,
apropos, we had a question about that.
Science fantasy is the best.
Star Wars. Oh my God.
Science fantasy, right?
That's science fantasy, and
any genre mashup is absolute. Like, it's one of my favorite things is to take elements from all of these nerd genres and just smush them all together and make a big polyamorous like book baby. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, the lines between science fiction and fantasy, I also honestly think are often quite thin, and there's a lot of room for crossover there. I think I did get one like slightly salty review of my own book that was just like, this is basically just like a fantasy novel, but like dressed up with tech. And I was like, well, yeah, that was kind of intentional on my part. Sorry to be mad, but like, but thank you for cottoning on to what I was trying to do. So,
but I think there's good space there for people who maybe find when they think science fiction, their minds immediately go to hard science fiction, which is super excellent. It is not something I am capable of writing because I just do not have like that amazing capacity to write the hard science fiction. But I think people think that, and if they don't read it, then it can get intimidating, or they think that some of the tech stuff sounds intimidating. So I feel like science fantasy is this like, it's this ramp toward it. Like you can use it as a bridge to sort of see what you like in the science fiction genre, which is honestly just as diverse as the fantasy genre. People have different types of fantasy subgenres that they like more than others, and science fiction has all of those. You just don't hear about it as much. But like all of our books are very different aspects of science fiction on the whole.
Yeah, so just answering Alexa's original question, do you mind for a second, then go forward? That's how my brain works. I'm sorry,
that's how it's a more fun discussion if we jump around. There's so much to cover.
Absolutely. So with Glitch Kingdom, I actually started it as a fantasy novel. And then I got to the big problem of the book of why would a prince or why would a king give up his kingdom? And like, I couldn't figure out the answer. And then I thought, well, maybe the whole world is a video game. And it was like this Matrix moment in my head of like, oh no, the whole world is broken. And that's where the interesting thing was for me. And I think with fantasy and sci-fi, it's kind of like on the same spectrum. You know what I mean? There's also the trappings of sci-fi that make it sci-fi, but the more you explain the magic, like the softer the magic kind of gets. So it's not so much about the sense of wonder or whatnot. It's more about the coolness of how this actually could work, which is just like fantasy novel and sci-fi all in one.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing, is that you get to solve problems by they're stuck in a video game in sci-fi and fantasy. Like you get to have those cool things that, you know, those what ifs that are just so outlandish and absurd, and you can just run with it.
Yeah, or because technology, which I know doesn't satisfy every sci-fi reader. I've definitely gotten those reviews. I feel like you all have, but I'm like, the fun part is the hand wavy because technology. That's why it's great. Whereas I suppose in fantasy that's because magic, but I like because technology.
Oh yeah, no, I think it might have been I want to say it was Fonda Lee. It might have been someone else, but I'm pretty sure it was Fonda who said something along the lines of like, yeah, like what tends to delineate like science fiction versus fantasies, like you have these like these incredible speculative settings, and then when you look at the underpinnings of like why things happen the way they do, is the answer technology or magic, and that's kind of what determines where you slot the genre. But often the story itself or the world or the plot could go either way, and it's kind of at the author's discretion whether you want to say because technology or because magic.
Yeah, that's really true.
Does anyone else want to talk about like what drew them to sci-fi? You don't have to. We can also, because like I'm also separately going to ask you about some of your favorite sci-fi properties. So
let's go to that. I was just going to talk about that. So
same.
I feel like what I love about sci-fi is, and this is what I have. I mean, not the publishing like literally listens to me, but I've tried to explain it. It's like sci-fi fans stan hard. We've got fandoms, like, and so I feel like I love how like passionately it's like, so like I'm a BSG girl and I'm like reboot, I'm like BSG, and then you have Star Wars people and Star Trek people. Not that you can't be all of them, but I love how it's like you have a thing that usually you found when you were younger, and it just like I love it. I love it so much. So yay. So
yeah,
sorry.
So I'm guessing like we're talking about what our fandom is, and mine's Star Wars. Like,
or whatever it was, that made you go sci-fi, or the many
definitely
things.
Star Wars. Like I would stay home from school sick and just watch Star Wars like over and over and over again. And I think it's that kind of romance adventure, like kind of aspect to Star Wars, because it is a science fantasy. It's because technology and because magic, like at the same time, and so that unknown element, that's things that we just can't even imagine within our world, really struck with me, and I think that's why my sci-fi is very science fantasy, is because of Star Wars and because of how much it influenced me as a child.
Mine was X-Men. I know, it was that thing. It was that thing early on. It was like I understood Magneto, I understood Xavier, I even understood like Mystique. But my favorite character was Storm because she was black. And as a kid, you were like, oh my God, she's black, she has white hair, and she controls weather. Oh my God, I want to do that. And like for a long time, like I don't know how old I was, but I remember being outside and like trying desperately to control weather, and it wasn't working out. And I was like, but if she can do it, why can't I? And because of that, I really think that X-Men really opened me up to the genre. And then I kind of I found like Star Wars, because no one in my family had watched Star Wars or talked about it. And I was like, what are these things? So then I started watching Star Wars, the old, like the first ones. And then I found books on Star Wars, and I was like, oh God. So it was like my mind was blown, and I'm like into Star Trek because I hadn't watched Star Trek really growing up. And now I'm into Star Trek, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, especially Discovery, because I'm a huge fan. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it so much. Sci-fi is just like, it's always it has that ability to tackle issues that you can't necessarily do in a way. It tackles these issues. It gives you the parallels. It gives you things to think about. It offers an entirely new world based on structures which might be within your own. It's got that fantasy as well. And it's all kind of there. And it also gives power to people who constantly feel disenfranchised or feel powerless. And that's what's really, really fascinating about Star Wars, sure. But X-Men definitely is, where it's like, there's no real understanding of who gets what and why, but what they do with it and why they're doing the things they do with it. And I think that's such a beautiful kind of way to look at storytelling as well. Is we don't know if it's good or bad. We just need to understand why. Mm-hmm. And I love to do that. And it's because of X-Men early on that I have the like gigantic moral quandaries. And I always want to like understand why characters do the things they do. And I don't want you to know if they're good or bad, because there isn't really such a thing sometimes. And that culture really outside in science fiction and fantasy culture isn't necessarily something we grasp or we have a complete understanding of, because it's a totally different world and it's a totally different society. So yeah, I could go on forever. I love it.
Did you watch the X-Men Evolution cartoons growing up by any chance?
I'll start singing this song.
I was going to ask if that was like my jam as a kid. So.
I love that. I just want publishing to give Alechia a Storm IP.
Yes. Oh my God.
I was going to ask about Dream.
Give it to her.
I'm trying to get everybody to give me IPs for stuff. I'm like, like I can do that. It's my dream. I don't know if I would love to. That would be my dream.
My dream IP would be Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., though. I'm just saying, Fitzsimmons are my sweet baby children, who I love with my whole soul. I came to sci-fi really because I was such a avid reader. I had read all of the Sweet Valley High and the Babysitters Club and like the Fear Street books. Like I just read everything, and I ran out of books faster than my mom could take me to the library. So I started reading my dad's books, which were all sci-fi, and I fell in love with Heinlein and Ursula K. Le Guin and all of the literary giants of sci-fi that have come before us. And then I feel like just surrounded by so many that were like shows and movies and books that were either fantasy or sci-fi, so much that it's all kind of blended together for me. Like Gargoyles, for example, that was like my first heart show. I watched every single one. That's not sci-fi, but it feels sci-fi to me for some reason. And then Star Wars, same for me. I'm actually currently hugging Baby Yoda. I love Star Wars. I love General Leia. It's just all about what Rose Tico says is following the love, right? Not fighting what you destroy, but going after what you love. So,
Andrea,
Rebecca,
go.
I totally agree with everything that's been said so far. I have a hard time actually pinpointing an exact property that got me started on sci-fi. I feel like I almost came into it by way of fantasy, because I think I got like much like Lora Beth, I also really liked Star Wars, but I think part of why I really liked Star Wars was because it reminded me of like fantasy novels that I was reading at the time, but it was in space, and therefore there was like this inherent cool factor that made that extra fun. I was also like a huge nerd for like Marvel, DC superhero comics and cartoons in general growing up. So Alechia would totally love to chat X-Men with you sometime when we're not taking up the entire panel chat. But yeah, I was a huge fan of superhero comics. I also like watched anime with like, I watched Gundam Wing. I watched all of the mech stuff as well. So I feel like I kind of just like grew up like with this love of genre mashups in general, sort of alluding to what we were talking about earlier. Because I think in comics and anime and like all of this stuff, often like those delineations between science fiction and fantasy and other forms of speculative storytelling aren't quite as clear cut. And as a kid, you don't really think necessarily in terms of genre labels. So I was kind of just like, oh, is it like a cool thing that takes place in like in a speculative reality where people get like cool powers and like fight with them, awesome. I don't care if it's like what you label it. I'm like, baby Andrea is like super here for that. So
yeah, I think I grew up kind of similar. It was just a lot. Like my family was a big reader. My mom's a big nerd. So like our house was full of like dragon statues and fairy statues. And we always had fantasy and science fiction books. The properties I remember the most, I remember playing Star Wars earliest. And I played Chewbacca because there was no horse at that point, and then all I wanted to be when I was very little was a horse. So I played Chewbacca a lot. But the one that I have the clearest memory of sitting down and like recognizing the experience is Star Trek Next Gen. Captain Picard was my very first crush. And was a lasting impact on the fact that I'm always predisposed toward bald men. And I just remember absorbing that show so like it was like ingrained in my bones by the time I was done with it, because I was like, I don't know, like 9 or something when I started watching it, and just that hope for a Star Trek future. And I still love Star Trek properties. That would be the IP that I would love to write in if I could. But the hope for a Star Trek future is always in my brain.
I actually had a Star Trek watch night tonight with my friends that I'm really excited about. We've been watching the latest season of Discovery, which is awesome.
It's so good.
It's so good.
The Star Trek Renaissance is making me so happy right now. Oh my God.
Yeah. Between like Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, which is hilarious, incidentally.
They're just like, we're going to keep developing Star Trek properties. I'm like, yes, please. I am well fed. Please.
And the Mandalorian.
Stuff.
Andrea, what's your dream IP, Andrea?
Oh my God, what is my dream IP? I feel like there are definitely like multiple IPs that I would be very happy to write for. I think like the big one, yeah, like I feel like I'm torn between either Star Wars or like something Marvel. Like yeah, one of those I would say.
Nice.
Yeah.
Lora Beth, what about you?
Hera Syndulla from Rebels.
And you got it pinpointed. I love that so much.
Yeah.
Not just a property, this character.
This thing, I don't have one because like I don't know what I'd be good to write. So I'm like, in fairness, I'm just gonna write murder books. That's fine. I'm just gonna kill people.
That goes beyond genre. Like you gotta murder books.
Gonna murder some people in books. So had a question a little earlier. It's a little like processy, but agent stories. Who are your agents? How you got your agents? Let's people. It's a writer channel. We love it.
Are we just going? I feel like
anyone can start
in order. So I'll just start if that's okay.
Or I could point. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I got my agent in 2015. I queried for a lot before, and then I did Pitch Wars in 2015 when I was mentored by Megan Lally. I apologize. She has several last names now, and I always forget which one's the right one. And then after Pitch Wars, my agent kind of set me up actually from Pitmad and my agent is Jessica Sindheimer from Context Literary, and she's amazing. We love Jessica. Hi, Jessica. And she helped me with my Pitch Wars book, which went out on sub and then did not sell. It was a YA fantasy, kind of a blended, almost sci-fi, but not quite. And it did not sell, sadly. And then my next book is Glitch Kingdom, which luckily was able to sell.
Nice. Who else wants to go? And it could also be like agents, like that was a specific question, but it could also be like sub stories, like whatever you want to talk about. I mean, selling sci-fi is actually a whole other question. The ups and downs of submission.
My agent story is kind of like, okay. Let's see. I wrote 2 sci-fi books. I got a mentorship from Justina Ireland's Writing in the Margins. And my mentor was Tamara Mateo, or Tam Mateo. She was awesome. She basically taught me how to write. And then we set aside those 2 books. I wrote The Sound of Stars, June 2017. I tried to get into Pitch Wars that year, didn't get in. A week later, I decided to pitch it in PitMed, and I got a few offers the weekend after. After the weekend. So yeah, it was like 3 days later, and I was like, shabam. It's very weird. It was cool. We worked on that for like 6 months of constant revisions, and then the agent was like, nah. So I got dropped from that, and then I had to find a new agent. And of course the first agent was like not really into sci-fi, which is kind of weird. And then the second agent was also sort of not into sci-fi. But we went on sub with The Sound of Stars and then sold it, I don't know, 6 months later. And that was really cool. But then like all my other ideas, they were like, nah, I don't really like sci-fi. So then like another, I don't know, 9 months later, I found my forever agent, I say. And she is pretty awesome, and that's Natalie Lacassil. And she kind of like just lets me do my weirdness, which is basically really all I need. It's like, can I do this? And she's always like, okay. I feel really, really happy, and I'm really, really grateful. But it's been a rocky road, and it's hard to write science fiction. It's hard to write science fiction as a Black author. It's hard to sell science fiction, and it's hard to sell science fiction as a Black author. So it's like it's kind of like a cyclical thing. Like you think you're gonna be all right, and you're like, no, it's not. But it's a hard genre to write, and it's a hard genre to break into, but it is so worth it because you know that you have an audience that is waiting for you. So
they want the books.
Yeah, they want it.
The books. Well, and like all sorts of different, like seriously, I just want to shake publishing sometimes because like all of your sci-fis are different, and that's how it should be. Like my debut year, they were all space books, which is great, not mad. Although they weren't all similar, even though my book should not have been comped to Star Wars. It was. That's a whole other thing. It wasn't anything like it. But that's the thing. Sci-fi readers want all sorts of different sci-fi. Buy the books. But you bring up a really interesting point. I'll just interject briefly. Finding an agent who doesn't just like one book that maybe they think is hooky, but actually likes sci-fi, like genuinely and beyond one, is really critical. Yeah. I've also I'm very grateful to have an agent who just clearly likes it, period, in all sorts of different forms, and would let me do what I want. Because there are indeed agents, they might like one book, but then they'll dislike everything else. And in my first agent situation, it was kind of like that. Like the second sci-fi genre book I turned in, she literally didn't understand it. She was like, what? And I was like, oh, I can tell now that you don't read this genre. Oh no. Cause like it'll be either they don't like it or they're asking you questions and you're like, are you not versed at all in this genre? Because these are givens to anyone. Like I shouldn't have to info dump here because anyone who knows anything about sci-fi, they're going to roll their eyes. That info dump's going to turn them off the book. Why do you need it? So yeah, finding the right agent is harder, but critical. And so rewarding when you connect with an agent who gets your books. So, and
I think more than just a love for sci-fi, they need to have a love for your brand of sci-fi. So I don't know. Yeah, I think my agent has other sci-fi books, but I know, and it's Victoria Marini. I have a very boring how I got my agent story. I just wrote a lot of books that sucked, didn't get agent, and then wrote a book that was okay, and then got an agent. Very boring. But she understands like my brand of sci-fi, and she understands like the kinds of things that I like to do, and I think that's important. And also knows how to sell sci-fi, because it's a different process than selling a fantasy, and so she knows how to do that. So like if you're looking for an agent, you need to make sure that one, that it's not just the book that they're interested in, but you as an author, but also do they know what to do with that book once they have it?
The editors and the imprints and the houses that actually will acquire sci-fi. There's fewer than you think. We're fine. Yeah. But the great agents, they like, I love talking to other sci-fi authors because they show me their sub list. I'm like, I know everyone on this list because these are the people who got my book too. like, because there's a great agent knows exactly who to sub a good YA sci-fi to. So. Yeah.
So I actually kind of had the experience originally. I think like with my first agent who I had, like, I think when I was like probably like fresh out of college and like not just new to publishing, but new to like being any kind of like financially independent adult who had to do things at all. So it was very overwhelmed by like just life in general. But I actually did have that experience of like originally having been signed with an agent who was fantastic, but was also like kind of interested in the one book and was not super like an SFF genre aficionado. And I could kind of tell because the original book that I signed with was like, it kind of straddled the line between being like a straight contemporary thriller and having sci-fi elements to it. And I felt like they kind of were like very gently pushing for it to be like less sci-fi and more just going with like the spy and the spy-fi angle and just like making it more and more contemporary. And like, and I think that's totally fine. It just wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. So like fast forward years and years later when I kind of like picked up my pen and wanted to do novels again and was getting back into writing, that was definitely something I kind of kept an eye out for. It was like, okay, I know that science fiction and fantasy is really my thing, and I want to sign with an agent who, as you said, like really loves genre stuff and nerdy, speculative, fun books in that vein, but also somebody who's going to like my particular take on it, right? Because like we all have such like unique individual voices, even within speculative fiction as a whole in YA. So signing with Tal was really a dream come true. I'm signed with Tal Lee at Sisterhood Literary Agency, and like I remember just like being on a call with her and like chatting about what would eventually become Rebel Wing, as well as like other ideas I had, and she was just game for all of it. Like I'd be like, oh yeah, can I introduce like this weird element to this other plot idea I had? And she's like, go for it. That sounds awesome to me. Like I'll find a way to make it work. So yeah, fantastic relationship. Feel super lucky to have the rep that I do.
I think that's so important when you're looking for an agent and you are as somebody who is interested in writing sci-fi, is you have to like put down all of your weirdest ideas, those books that you are aspiring to write, the ones that are cooking on the back burner, and make sure you talk about that with the agent, because that way they know how your brain works and where your stories want to go. Because yeah, I think that's a great way when you are on a call of sussing out whether an agent's going to get your stuff. I would really try not to cuss here. This is, if I sound spotty, that's why. But like,
I'm not the only one struggling.
I'm so bad in my day-to-day life, so I'm trying to be professional.
I dropped F-bombs in live streams, and they're it's fine.
Okay. If you want to know if an agent's going to get your shit, you got to be able to like explain some of your weirder ideas. So I kind of came in through my agent through the back door. I had a sci-fi. It was originally adult, and then an author friend of mine read it. And she goes, "You should try this as a YA, and you should send it to Laura Perkins at Andrea Brown." And she was not currently open, but she took this author's referral. And this all happened. I had another agent offer at the same time. And so it was a very frantic couple of weeks in January of 2016. And I ended up signing with Laura because she got what I was doing. She got the book, and she got some of my other ideas. And she, it's been a great relationship so far. And that book didn't end up selling. That was not Crown Chasers. It was a totally different sci-fi. But she got Crown Chasers and the sequel, which I totally forgot to mention, which comes out this fall. Like she was on, I totally forgot to mention, I have another book coming out. But like it comes out, like she got those. And every time I sit down and I discuss an idea, if it's weird, if it's genre mashup-y, which my next idea is, she's on board. So I think if you're a sci-fi writer and you're thinking, how do I know who to sign with? Make sure that you're signing with the right person. Make sure that you are telling them all your ideas, not just the one that you have, but the future ones you want to write, because it's not uncommon for I've had author friends across the board in lots of categories sign with an agent, and then that agent doesn't like their next book. So make sure you have that conversation, because it's just, it happens a lot.
Yeah. And just like my thing is, I feel like not all sci-fi writers are weird writers and have weird books, but I'd say wildly nerdy is how I will put it obviously great way, but it is critical, like, it's not like you're testing the agent, but like you do want to find an agent who likes weird, who likes nerdy. Because I'll tell you, like, the thing I'm learning more and more about publishing, the deeper I get, is a lot of agents are very normal people, which is lovely for them. I'm not a normal person, so I'm like, what's that like? But editors too. Most editors are deeply normal people. And I'm like, you mean you don't have crippling anxiety and like you were popular in high school? And I'm like,
is there anyone in the world who doesn't have some degree of crippling anxiety? Like, that blows my mind.
Not after this year, everybody's got it now.
Now they do, right? But I've just had experiences where I've realized, oh, you're a delightfully normal human being, and I'm a little weird, and that's okay. But that's fine when you got your agent advocate who gets your weird, who loves your weird, who's like, I love this weird book. Yes, you need that. Because I have just found, like, sometimes I'm like, I think authors are generally kind of weird in a good way. But like not everyone on the publishing side is. And I personally like that my advocate gets me. So yeah, I agree. And my occasionally weird ideas. Yeah. They're not that weird, in fairness. They're just all like murder. It's fine. I murder people in every single book. And I realized, oh, in fairness, that's just great in sci-fi. Let's murder more people in sci-fi. It's fine. Actually, so this is a fun question that, I mean, we'll cry. It's fine. How do you market YA Sci-Fi?
Oh man.
Anyone know?
$1 million question right there.
Oh, Purple. I don't know.
We're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, so is publishing.
Like experience on debuts and tell us, because I'd be very much writing down notes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, right? Because I feel like a lot of other aspects of like the media and entertainment industry have got it on lock how to market sci-fi. Like sci-fi has ruled the box office in Hollywood for what, like a decade now, between like Star Wars, the Star Trek reboots, like all of like the 50 zillion MCU movies and Netflix adaptations now, right? So that's all figured out. Even I'd say like the adult side of speculative fiction, like SFF imprints, have a pretty healthy science fiction stable. So I've also wondered for a long time why the young adult industry in particular within publishing, within the broader entertainment sphere, kind of has trouble with sci-fi. Because I'm like, wow, I think we're kind of like the last bastion. Like everyone else has kind of got it. And like we're still sort of like, what do? Robot.
How market? What sell?
Yeah.
Especially since it's the same audience, right? That is going to see Star Wars and the MCU that would be reading YA as well. Like there's a lot of crossover or a lot of overlap in that audience. So I think we should take some pointers from how those are marketed, because I think
Well,
that would.
I definitely, not gonna lie, got super into Goddess in the Machine specifically because I was going through like a Star Wars withdrawal patch, and it like scratched the itch for me.
You know what we should do? We should get somebody to make a video of our books and then put it in front of like there's a movie trailer in front of like all the Marvel movies and stuff and like Star Wars. And here are some YA sci-fi books. If you like that, and it'd be like, ooh, maybe that'll work. I don't know. Could work. It could.
I like that, actually, yeah. Like depending on depending on like which of these movies you were most into. Like if you like this movie, you would probably enjoy this book. Like
I think
we got some booktubers watching. They can make
yeah, synergize, right? That's the
Right.
to like communicate with each other.
But that's actually an excellent suggestion. And I would say, why aren't YA publishers pitching those videos to booktubers who they are perfectly capable of sponsoring and do sponsor all the time for, I'm getting really dirty here. They sponsor all the time for YA fantasy and it's great. And they'll literally do like, which princess am I quiz. I've seen wonderfully creative sponsored booktube videos. They don't do that for sci-fi. And I'm like, why? I will tell you who the YA sci-fi booktubers are. I have literally a spreadsheet. Literally, guys, if you want it, I have it. I made it. It exists. Did my publisher use it? No, they did not. So
I wonder a little bit, because I've been thinking a lot in brainstorming a new project. I've been thinking a lot about Tropes and id, and Jennifer Lynn Barnes did a wonderful talk at RWA a few years back about writing to your id and writing in those tropes. And I feel like, so the nice thing about Star Wars and Marvel is that people already sort of know the tropes in those big properties because they're so big. So they know, like, the people who are attracted to those tropes go there. And I feel like sometimes we personally have limits as authors about how much we can get out there on our own. What I feel like some of the disconnect is I don't always know that publishing marketing knows how to speak to the tropes that speak to sci-fi readers. Yeah. They don't know how to pull those out and really speak to those and be all like, it's this and it's this and it's this. It's exactly what you want. Because when I see people reviewing, the people who have connected with Crown Chasers are connecting with, oh my gosh, it's a sassy rebel space pilot. And you're like, that is a trope that they will go in for every single time. And so when they discover that that's in the book, so like the most as an author I can do is tweet about it. Hey, if you like these sci-fi tropes, then you'll like this one. But like on a grand scale, I feel like that's where sometimes they don't know how to speak to the specific things that ring a sci-fi reader's bell, that maybe it's just easier to transmit visually in visual properties, and it's not as easy to, but like that's where I feel like the conversation hasn't gone yet. Like they know the fantasy tropes. They know how to discuss romantic comedy tropes.
Put a crown on the cover.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I'll read it.
Exactly. I don't always know the sci-fi tropes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, and I mean, I actually think it depends, because I think the big one is they fall down on covers repeatedly, because covers are actually a big one. They'll nail a YA fantasy cover or a YA contemporary, and I'm like, I know what this book is. And sometimes with sci-fi, I'm like, I will have read a book and I'm like, that cover doesn't accurately promote the sci-fi that I know is in that book. Mm-hmm. They try.
But I have to say, I am super happy with my cover. Rebecca and I have the same cover artist, and
he
takes over.
Yeah,
like just how you have like the big names in the YA fantasy covers. I hope he becomes a big name in YA sci-fi covers, because I think it's like he reached into my brain and was like, "Here you go."
Ask Ashley who your cover artist is, because I love their art.
Yeah, it's a great cover.
His name is Doaly.
Doaly?
Doaly.
Okay.
And you can find him on Instagram and Twitter with that name, and he does excellent work across the board.
Awesome.
I also I got Bill Ellis for my paperback cover, and I know he's done a ton of fantasy ones, but I was very happy with my paperback cover. from a sci-fi angle. Like, I was like, oh, good job, Bill. Yay.
Yeah. No, I had Mike Heath for both Rebel Wing and for its companion novel, Renegade Flight, which I think was also beautiful. So I was like, the cover art definitely just exceeded my expectations. Like, I'm super, super grateful on that end. Like, because in part because my artist, I think I went and definitely Google stalked him and looked at his portfolio, and he does do a lot of like kind of like almost movie poster-esque like superhero style art, and I feel like that translates really well to YA sci-fi, or at least the kind of YA sci-fi that I do. So I was just like, oh bless, this is such a good match. Oh, I can't puppy. Hello.
I'm sorry, she's like, I usually send her over to my parents during these, but I didn't, and she is not happy that I am talking to somebody who's not her.
She can co-star. That's fine. We can share.
And I will say something that I think is happening because covers are marketing. In fairness, I think adult sci-fi has been in transition for their covers as well. Like, think about some of the cheesy old sci-fi covers. Like, can't really do those anymore. But like, even adult has hits and misses. Yeah. And a lot of adult covers don't work in YA. So I think YA hasn't. I think they're getting there because I've seen some that I've really liked, like a couple of yours, obviously. One or two of mine. But they're figuring it out because YA covers are different. You can't just do an adult cover, but there has to be this happy medium of what's going to work for the YA market, but still says sci-fi. Because I just can't, so many times I see a sci-fi cover and I'm like, well, that looks like a fantasy, or well, that looks like a contemporary. And it's font choices. It's like even just the texture that they're using on the cover sometimes, where I'm like, a tiny change would have signaled to a sci-fi fan, oh, this is for me. So it's just they got to work on that. And then just comps. I honestly think a huge problem in YA publishing, this is just me getting on a soapbox, I guess. Most people, and it's not their fault, most of the people who work in sales, marketing, and publicity don't like sci-fi. They don't read it, they don't watch it. And so thus, how the heck, like, of course they comp every single YA sci-fi to Star Wars, which is accurate sometimes and completely inaccurate other times because everyone has seen Star Wars. Everyone. Yeah. But that doesn't help if your book is not a science fantasy. No. And it's tropes again. It's like, you have to know what to comp. You have to know what tropes are going to work for sci-fi fans. And so we as the authors, we can only do so much.
Yeah.
So, and we do all do that. I think all of us have probably done, if you like this is in my book. We've all done that tweet with emojis. Yeah. And they're great, but like the publisher has to do that too. It needs to be in the flap copy. It needs to be in the places that it's pitched for stories. I have a lot of feelings. Yeah. So.
I also think that there are some storytelling tropes. Again, I know I've talked a lot about transcending genre, but do like transcend genre and like sometimes could bring new readers into science fiction, and specifically young adult here in science fiction as well. So like, I mean, if you are somebody who's crazy about like, I don't know, like an enemies to lovers plot, like that exists in multiple genres, including science fiction. So I can easily see somebody who's like gung-ho here for that relationship dynamic being like, oh, I want this in any genre. And if your book has it, whether it's science fiction or contemporary or whatever, like I'll go for it. So like that might be like another angle also to just bring in somebody who might otherwise be kind of reluctant to pick up something in a genre outside of their normal comfort zone.
That's why I wrote romance, which like my book's barely sci-fi, but that was intentional. Yeah. Like, if you like this, read these other books that are way more sci-fi. We have some good questions from the chat. I like this one. How has science and or technology been a stumbling block in your storytelling? If so, how did you overcome it? So I guess incorporating technology into sci-fi.
For me, I'm not all that smart. So there are times when I have to like do my research and be like, well, why would that work? And it helps to know people who are really smart and who are scientists. And I mean, like, I'm a pastry chef and I can do like food science, but like, I can't tell you why like lasers can destroy things. Like I can't do that. So for me, it's like, I just have to be able to research it. And when I research it and I feel like I understand it, then I feel like I can write the 1 to 2 sentences that are necessary for people to understand it in the book. And, you know, again, it's no book is written alone. Everybody, you always are happy and lucky when you have somebody to help you out and be like, no, that's not how that works. And I'm very grateful I have people who are like, no, Alechia, you can't do that. So
yeah, and it is only a few sentences like that you to explain it. And I'm really lucky because my critique partner is Emily Suveda, who writes hard sci-fi and understands science and technology and computers like nobody's business. And so yeah, she's just like, okay, so these are the things that don't work, and here's how you can fix it. So definitely what Alechia said is that you surround yourself with people who can help you, because you know you only have access to the things that you have access to, and that might not be enough for your book. So you have to get help in order for things to be genuine and realistic. But also, like Alechia said, a lot of times, like explaining the technology part, you just need a few sentences, and then to explain it, and then that suspension of disbelief takes over, and you have to make sure that the internal logic works, because there's a lot of science in my book that is not real, can never work, will never work. But as long as it's consistent within the world, you can convince people that this is a legitimate thing, as long as it remains consistent.
Yeah, don't have Emily read my book if she knows hard science. It's not gonna work. I just make it up. I took a Stargate approach and put a wormhole in the middle of something. Like, that doesn't actually work.
She reads my drafts and she's like, oh yes, this is really good, really great. I love the story. Now here are some things that don't work. So like, yeah, she's totally like awesome with story and stuff like that. And she allows herself to have suspension of disbelief. But yeah, she's also good when you need that extra bit of help because you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely like a soft sci-fi, borderline fantasy, take liberties with your world building kind of writer. I feel like I actually got kind of lucky with Rebel Wing because I definitely just like made everything up, which is weird because I definitely have a lot of people in my life who are much smarter than I am with STEM subjects. Like one of my best friends is like a computer scientist, like an MIT trained computer scientist. My father's a physicist. Like I'm surrounded by like big brains in my life. And I just like, it didn't occur to me to like consult with any of them. I'm just gonna do what I want and like make up what brings me joy and like so be it. But I feel like I don't know. I kind of lucked out with like I guess the choices that I made because later I think my dad read my book. He was like, "Oh, actually, Andrea, like your approach to AI is like not all incorrect." And I was like, "Oh, thanks, Dad. I think that's like the nicest thing you've ever said about my class in science at all." So. But yeah, no, I definitely agree that you don't necessarily need to like over explain the science in your science fiction. But yeah, I mean, like, I think if you have the resources available to you, definitely like doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and I like that you said like, writing what brings you joy, because if it brings you joy, it has a greater chance of bringing the reader joy. I actually think Emily did an essay about this, about how a lot of times people will call into question her credentials, and she'll be able to like pull up her degrees and be like, haha, but that shouldn't be the gatekeeping for science fiction. Like, it's great if you have it, but that's not what science fiction is about. It's about like these ideas of the progress of humanity, and it's about all these what ifs. So it's great if you have the degrees that can help you, but that's not the bar that you have to meet in order to write sci-fi.
Well, and STEM people, we love them, but sometimes write the driest fiction. So it takes all sorts. We need all types, and yeah, just get that CP. Actually, someone did ask a question specific to research. So did you guys what kind of research did you have to do for your books? How do you approach research? How do you apply it? Do you do it up? This is always a fun one, before or after like when I tell people, yeah, I really don't research before, and they go, I'm like, well, you can probably tell in the book anyway. Calm down. I research as I go. So
Yeah, I research as I go. Can I do that? Google, can I do that? No, I can't. Oh God, I can't do that. Okay.
Yeah. I want the dramatic thing to happen. Can I even do that? Oh no. Okay. All right, fine.
The great
My
thing
next
about
one is an alternate history. So the amount of research I've had to do for this darn book, it's like, but I always do it as I go as well. And it's just, I usually write just the first chapter as it is, and then I like look into everything. Like, did you know that that cars in the 1920s didn't have trunks to stick dead bodies in? Because I've learned that.
Now we know why they invented trunks.
Yeah,
so.
now we know. Like sometimes I write a scene and then like I find out, no, that didn't work. Because of historically that wasn't invented for another 20 years or type of a thing. And sometimes I lean into the alternate history part and I just let it exist anyway. It makes for a good life.
I am married to a German, and I think that's really important to note, because if you are married to a German and you ask them a question, they will never say, oh, I don't know. They'll be like, excuse me a second, I will find out. And then they'll show up like 2 hours later with like a plethora of information, like, and here's why your accusation was wrong, or here's why this can't work. Because the Germans have like this culture of like, something if it's impossible, it's impossible. And so if it's not impossible, then there must be a possibility. And if there's a possibility, then you must research this possibility and you must understand it. And I am married to someone who is like, Alechia, I was thinking about this. And you're like, oh. So I'm married to somebody who's like that, and it's really intense. And when I was writing The Sound of Stars and I was like trying to figure out some stuff, he was like, good news, here's your birthday gift. And it was like a book on physics for science fiction writers. And he was like, you see, now you can answer your own questions. And I was like, oh, thank you. And then I was like, I was trying to figure something out. And he's like, did you read your book? And I was like, it's over there. It's like really hard for me to read. And he's like, I'll read it for you. So now he has read the book so that he can tell me things about the book. And it's like, that's how we do things. And I'm really glad for that, because I don't have to read the book.
Oh my God, all this is so amazing.
Physics for science fiction writers book. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, now I'm going to look up that book, but then I'm also always going to be thinking about this story that you're telling while I read this book. It's going to be amazing.
Such an earnestly well-meaning thing for a spouse.
So amazing.
Yeah. I was researching why lasers cannot be useful in a zombie apocalypse. You may want to know this. And I'm like, I didn't want to know that, but I mean, I'll know it now. You can tell me, it's fine. And it's really good. Like, so whenever I get stuck, I can be like, hello, and he's like, haha, I've been waiting for you to have it. Great.
This is so awesome.
You should all have him. If you want to talk to him, just talk to him. He'll be like, for someone to ask me. Like, really happy about it. German, real fun.
Get a German. Okay.
Get a German.
Phone a German.
Solve all of your research problems.
Oh, I love you so much.
So we mentioned tropes, and one of the questions that someone submitted on my community tab was, what are your favorite sci-fi tropes? And I would also like to tack onto that. What are your favorite sci-fi tropes? What's at least one awesome sci-fi trope in your book, so that people will then, like, I'm sure they already have bought them or want to buy them, but like, sell yourself again, like, name those tropes, because we read for tropes. And those favorite tropes, like, are they ones that like you're definitely going to write in the future? Like, let's just talk about tropes, because this is the thing with the marketing question. I'm like, if YA publishing only understood, like, it's all about the tropes. Freaking love them. So favorite sci-fi tropes, go. Anyone can start.
Mine is time travel, and I will never write it because it sounds real confusing. The closest I've gotten is goddess, because she falls asleep at one time and then wakes up at another time, but she can't go back. Like, So I love time travel. I love when time travel is done well and when it has consistent rules. But no, I will not write it because I don't like when time travel isn't done well. And so I don't want to fall into that category. And then my other favorite is the multiverse. And I do have a book that I wrote before Goddess that has to do with the multiverse, and I will go back to it and polish it up because I just love alternate realities and things like that.
I feel like I've got a couple. I mean, like the most obvious one, I think, in like my little debut duology is obviously giant robot neck fights. Was huge Pacific Rim fan. You can probably tell from the subject matter that I've chosen to tackle in my novel. So yeah, no, I don't know. I'm a big fight nerd. I'm a martial arts fan. Like I love a good, well done combat scene and seeing how you can enhance that with like sci-fi technology stuff and like make it even splashier and cooler as a result. So I definitely like had a blast playing around with that in Rebel Wing, and even more so in Renegade Flight, its companion. I also, and like this is kind of, like I feel like I sort of use this in Rebel Wing, and I think I might use it more explicitly in future work. But I love a good alternate history, just because like it might be because I have a background in international affairs, and you see all these moments, especially in recent history, where if like one thing had gone slightly differently, it would have completely altered sort of like the cultural context for a bunch of other ensuing events. And I feel like that's a lot of fun to play with. But going back to the research question, I would definitely have to do, I think, like a lot more reading and background research than I typically would. But yeah, it's something that I really enjoy reading. I think it's something that I could have a lot of fun writing. So yeah, we'll see down the line. That might be something I play with a little more. Definitely with Rebel Wing, there are like aspects of that because it does take place in this kind of near future North America. So I definitely did read up a decent amount, I think, on like not just like US American history, but like Canadian and Mexican history as well, just because like one of the big world building concepts in my book is this idea of permeable borders between countries. But yeah, I mean, I'm a giant nerd. I would love an excuse to read more on that because I definitely found out a lot of fun facts that did not make it into the book. So
Nice.
So for me, when I was a teenager, I fell in love with a series of books called So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane.
oh man, yeah.
I love them so much, Nina and Kit and all of them. I absolutely, my favorite thing about it is the magic was so realistic to me, and that I literally believed it was real. Like I said that oath out loud several times just in case. Like it's all based on speech magic, which is just so cool. But to me, it was the idea of magic being possible that just really, really simmered in me. And so that is the trope, my favorite trope in Glitch Kingdom, is that the technology of this video game breaking down gives them this magical powers, really, because they have like game powers. Like you would have if you were just playing a regular video game. Like one can use these whirligig wings and fly, and like one can find directional things and stuff like that. And I just to my heart, I love the idea of magic being so explainable and from a technological place that you almost believe that it's possible. And so that's my favorite trope that's in Glitch Kingdom.
I think I crammed a lot of my favorite sci-fi tropes into Crown Chasers because it's this big, like, zigzaggy space adventure. I mean, again, going back to Star Trek, it was the strange new worlds discovery thing, and there's a lot of that. Like, that's at the heart of a lot of it. They go to just multiple different planets and multiple different alien species, and I like all of that very much. It's also got some of just like space mechanics. I love every space mechanic I've ever met in fiction. And so I put a space mechanic in here. I put space pirates. Basically, we put space in front of any occupation. I like it 12 times more. So I put those in there. One of my favorites is the spaceship as a character. it's always been like one of those things that goes to the heart of me, from the Enterprise to Galactica. Recently, the Razor Crest on the Mandalorian is like I'm as worried for that ship as I am for many of the characters, and it doesn't like they didn't even like give it a person, like it's not like it's got the computer like an Enterprise. But I built that into Crown Chasers too. I wanted Alyssa Farshad's ship to be almost a character and not just a setting, because it's her home and there's an AI on board, and I wanted it to be a presence. So yeah, I think there we go. That's the end of the sentence. I found it.
For me, the Sound of Stars is not, I don't know if it's very tropey so much so that it has the one sunshine and the one grump, the one who's like super emotional and wears his heart on his sleeve, and the one who's like, back it up. So I think that's where the Sound of Stars does it. But for the Kindred, I really went into trope like, I love it because I love the idea of two people being mentally connected, and I love that trope so much, and like them sharing these thoughts and like kind of liking each other but not wanting to tell each other that. And I love that. And then the one bed is always my favorite as well. I love it. And then also the ship having a personality and like an AI voice, and like it's so much fun to kind of go into tropes. And I really love any kind of I love stories that again are like they focus on the moral grayness, and then what's bad and what's good, and the twists, and like watching the good people do kind of bad things for good reasons. Those are like, I can't get enough. So I love all of
that. We got a writing process question, which I just always love. So it is, in essence, this is kind of a plotter or pantser question-ish. So what writing process, like how do you guys approach writing? Who outlines? Who doesn't talk?
I
can.
You pants.
Can
it. I outline obsessively. I brain. So the first step in every process is I get a notebook and a pen and I brainstorm, and I ask myself questions about the world and about the characters, and I figure out which ideas are working and which aren't, and often have a whole page where I'm like, well, forget all of the stuff I just wrote. What's the actual stuff that we're writing? When I have an idea that I think works, then I outline. Like sometimes it's sometimes it's a more scarce outline. Sometimes it's down to the chapter, but I have to know the scaffolding of a story, and then I get in and write it. And occasionally then toss out the entire middle on second revision, but I basically zero draft as an outline.
Yeah, I definitely I pantsed Rebel Wing, and that turned out fine because I had all the time in the world to do it, and I wasn't on contract when I was writing. I was just I think it would be fun to write a weird revolutionary book about giant robot dragons, and I could just do this for fun on my own time. And then after I got my book deal, thank you very much, I discovered this thing called deadlines, and found out the hard way that if you are expected to turn out a full-length novel inside of a year, pantsing, for me personally, there are some people who are probably more powerful than I am in this respect. I bow down to you. But I've discovered that pantsing is a no-go for me when I'm on that kind of schedule, just because I will write myself into corners and not have enough time to extract myself from them. I still don't see myself ever becoming a super strict outliner, because inevitably, even when I do kind of write a loose synopsis of what I'm doing, I'll deviate and I'll have to change things up. But I feel at least having a roadmap has lent me a much needed sense of security and kind of scheduling for when I need to get things done by a certain time. And I guess that also kind of answers a business of writing style question.
I pants, or I used to pants and then just rewrite. So I would write the wrong book, and then so I'd rewrite it from scratch, and then write the wrong book again, and then rewrite it from scratch. And I tried to do that on deadline with book 2. And I have rewritten this book 3 times. I rewrote it again for my last deadline in about 6 weeks. And I'm going to have to start outlining. Like, it just does not work. So I have a process that works for me, but it's not going to work with the publishing aspect of writing. So.
I write my first 3 chapters of an idea. If I have like an idea and I'm like, "Ooh, this is gonna be fun! I'm so excited about it." I sit down and I write the first 3 chapters. If within the first 3 chapters I know that this is an idea that can pan out and I can write an entire book about it, that I enjoy the characters, that this is something I think I could sell at some point, then I will outline. It's not a very strict outline, but it is a roadmap, just like Andrea said. So I do that, and then that's what I go from. And sometimes that takes a few weeks to write. Sometimes that takes a few months to write. But that's been my process, and it has been really, really helpful for me, because then I allow myself to kind of pants a little and explore what I want to do. And then when I need to hunker down and stay on deadline, then I have that outline there, and I'm like, okay, I know what I need to do. So that works out for me.
I'm also a reformed outliner for all of the reasons so well explained. But for Sisterhood of Secret Ambitions, actually, my first draft I wrote in verse. I didn't plan to; it just came out in verse. But it was actually really, really fun. I got to the heart of the story, and some of like the most powerful emotional moments of it actually are pretty consistent. Now I've switched it from verse to prose. And I wrote like the first plot arc of it in like about 10,000 words because it was in prose. So, I mean, in verse. And so then that was actually a really fun and easy way, surprisingly, to write that book. I wrote that book really quick because I knew that the verse wasn't going to be the final version of it, if that makes sense. And so I just got right to the heart, which was really fun. And now I'm building another story, and I am outlining the crap out of it. I've never really outlined as much as I am right now. And I'm taking a bunch of craft classes online, and I'm just doing all of as much work as possible, because I did end up rewriting Glitch Kingdom like 8 or 9 times. And so, like, just because I was such a discovery writer. So I don't want to do that for this next one. So I'm going to make all my mistakes up front.
I know the question wasn't for me, but I guess I'm the one over here who's like, plants her till I die. But I've always road mapped, in fairness. So I think I always fell in the middle, especially because 2 of mine were retellings. So that's like a cheat code. Interesting, because it is true. It's really hard to pants on deadline. Like, it's almost impossible. Yeah. I've also never rewritten a book though, because I am a coward. So like, I make it work. So I got another good general question. It's not like sci-fi specific, but writing characters. Like, everyone has a different approach to creating characters, to writing characters. Yeah, and people want to know. I know that's broad. Like, do you have like, and we all have like different tips and tricks. Like, some people it's character sheets, some people it's definitely not that. Like, what are your ways into characters, or any like writing hacks you have for writing characters?
For me personally, I am visual. Everything, I have to see it in my head. So even before I will write those first 3 chapters, I have to see a kind of like a scene or the person. And then when I see something, then I'm able to understand a little bit about them. And then as I start writing them, I understand them. And that's why all my characters are kind of weird and different. But also, it's like, when you're used to doing things visually, and I think it's because I moved to Germany and I didn't understand the language at first. I really had to take a lot of cues from verbal communication. So nonverbal. There you go, Alechia. So then I kind of learned a lot how to understand what people want from me and what they're trying to communicate without using words. And because of that, and having those kind of images, I'm able to see these kind of characters in my head and be like, okay, this is what they're about and this is what they want. And I kind of go from there. And I don't know if that works for everybody, but when I write books, I try to keep it as visual as possible at all times, because especially with sci-fi, you want to be able to see these things. You want to be immersed in these things. And I like to think of sci-fi, especially as popcorn escapism, where you kind of feel like you could chew your popcorn and watch it and like, yeah, this is great. And that's how I want to do it. And I think that's probably a very different process for people who are a lot more literary, and for people who are like, I think I write character-driven books, but I don't know. Like I don't know. I don't know how we define these things. So I don't know. You find your own way.
Yeah, I try to figure out like what is, because I always start with like a concept. And so when I'm creating the characters, I'm like, what kind of character would have the most conflict with this concept? So for instance, for the concept for goddess, a girl wakes up and she's been worshipped as a goddess. What kind of person would that be a conflict for? And that would definitely not be like a theater major who loves attention, right? So like it's, and that cuts down the conflict. And so you have to figure that out. What is going to be the most friction between the plot and the character. But I think a lot of my characters, and I think also because I am not somebody that wants a whole lot of attention, so a lot of my characters have bits of me in them. And I think it was Victoria Schwab that says like she breaks off a part of herself and grows something new out of that piece. And I think not to speak for everybody, but I think we kind of do that subconsciously with our characters, is because we're writing who we know. And I think especially the main characters and point of view characters have a little bit of us in them, at least, because this is the character through whose eyes we are seeing the plot play out. So it's just like a tiny bit of us that we grow into something new. And but it definitely needs to be the person that has friction against the plot.
Yeah, that's very smart.
I always start with that, and this is probably something that has come up, is the want versus need. That is at the most basic core of building the main character and any other like main characters that go with it. So in Alyssa, it was, what does she want? What does she need? What does she want? She wants to go and explore and just be like wild and no responsibility. Okay, so what is the most, this kind of goes with what Lora Beth was saying, what is going to provide the greatest conflict to that want? And once you figure out that, then you really start to figure out, well, this is how I really going to put them through the ringer. Like what can I really throw at him that's going to make this just horrible for the main character. But I don't think I can go anywhere with the character until I know what they want versus what they need. And after that, a lot of the voice and the nuances of the character, personally for me, come through revisions. It's explored a lot in the first draft and refined in subsequent drafts.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know. I don't know if like my readers would necessarily agree, but I guess like I as an author feel as though the seed of a lot of the storytelling that I do is really about relationships between characters. So that's often just like a starting point for me. So for me, I often go in on like, I guess like dialogue and physicality. Like how do these characters move around each other? How do they behave around each other? And what are they saying to each other? And often I find that is what drives the plot forward. Because so much of like, even though there are like these like big, fun kind of cinematic sci-fi stakes that we all love, I find that like what draws me into fiction, I think as a consumer, whether I'm reading or whether I'm watching TV or whatever, is often those kinds of relationships. So I think strive to recreate that in my own work, where like, yes, we love these big stakes plots, but at the end of the day, like we like, we want to know what's happening with, relationships within these found family units. Like, will they or won't they romances? Like, complex partnerships between people who were otherwise enemies. Like that, I guess, like that very like deeply sort of like complex human element. If that makes any sense.
And I love that. I think that characters are often found like as their goals hit each other, like, in the conflict between them. And yeah, for me, character building is messy because I think real people are messy. And so I try and say what their goals are and what conflicts are, just like we were saying. But what is standing in the way of their goal always has to be an internal thing. So I have their external goal and then their internal goal, which always kind of fits in the middle. And then again, it's with revision, you get to know the characters more and things, but there's so many ways that you can really layer these characters. And I just, again, paint them with what I love, things that I want to see in them. For example, in Glitch Kingdom, there is a character named McKenna who is a theater nerd who is given these all-powerful moments, and she's just like, "Oh, look at me!" And she becomes a villain kind of accidentally because she's having so much fun, just like chewing on the scenery, which is it was just so much fun to write. So I think all of my characters are, again, those pieces of me in different places. Dagny, for example, is often my anger in situation because she reacts things first anger, and Greg is I'm smart, but I'm actually not that smart. He's kind of the himbo of the character. But I don't know. I feel like all of my characters are me, but also like the fights in between me. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think all characters should be also like things about them should not make sense. Like people who are really brave might also be scared of certain things, and so it's those things that nobody is just one thing. It's those mixture of gray and those conflicts, but also inconsistencies, I guess, is where I think like the deepest characterization is found.
Absolutely. We got a question about world building. Just wondering if any of you have gotten stuck here too, where you're working on a project. I feel like this can happen with sci-fi, where you're world building and you're world building. So how do you the story has lost gas. Like, how do you get it going and then write the thing? Like, I guess it's really balancing the world building part with everything else.
It's so easy to get lost in that.
Yeah.
It really is. And it's so easy to let world building take over, and then you're sitting there going like, well, I can't start until I know what the currency in this world was about 10 years before the story starts, because it could, and it, like, you get into those details. It's rough. I think the only way to get out of it personally would be for me to go back to my main character or characters and remind myself, what about these characters am I most excited to write? Because as much I love world building and I love plot and I love high concepts and all of that stuff, like I'm not the person who's going to write the slow, quiet book. That's just not me. But it still has to come back to why these people, why this person, why these two people, why this group, like why them, what excites you about those characters. And I think that if you can refocus on that, then you can dig your way out of the world building stuff. You have to remind yourself what you got excited for and about with this plot and these characters before you started into the details of the world.
I just want to say first, all of your answers to the last question were so smart. Holy crap. My editor would be like, why am I working with this one? These kids, everybody else.
Yes, Alechia.
No, I'm not kidding. All of this was the stuff that she just wrote me in her editorial note. She was like asking questions. What does this character want? And I was like, really? Anyway, For me, I have to be hyped about a story to write it. Like, I have to be excited to write this thing. I have to look forward to scenes later on that are going to make me like, that make it okay for when I have to slow down a little and I have to like develop the things that I need to develop. But I also don't like getting bogged down by details because, first of all, your readers won't like it. And second of all, most of the details that you need to include are things that only take a line or two to get in there. So it really has to be exactly as you both said. You have to be excited. You have to be excited about the plot. You have to be excited about your characters, and you have to understand why you are writing it in the first place. And you have to find that love and that hype again, so that you can continue it. And anything that is overly complicated and is taking up too much of your time, you might just want to push it away for now, because it's never as much as you think you need. It's like you don't need that as much as you need the plot. And world building is great. It's not my absolute favorite thing, but world building, it's not as important as your characters and your plot. It's something you can add later. It's not as important in your first draft, I think. And I think bogging yourself down early means you're going to lose the game before it even starts.
Yeah, and I have to be careful giving this piece of advice because this is why I rewrite so many times, is that I'm always like, oh, I can worry about that in the next draft, right? So don't go so far as to what I do, where you just worry about everything the next draft. But with world building, right, it's important. It's not important, but you can, especially if you're writing YA sci-fi, the world building is not as important as, like Alechia said, the characters and the plot. And so what I do is I world build as I go, and then I layer things with each new draft. So the world in the first draft is very shallow. But as I revise, it gets deeper and deeper. And then things that I explored in the first draft gets cut in the second draft, but that's still there in my mind. And since that's there in my mind, it in some way gets on the page. So I think, like, if you're waiting for your world to be perfect before you start writing, you're never going to start writing.
Yeah.
Because even like looking at a published book, like I'm like, oh, it would have been cool if I had done this. Like, you could world build forever, but at some point you have to just start writing. You just have to start writing.
Yeah, I often, like, I guess, again, like, this also kind of builds off of my answer to the previous question, because I am such a character-focused writer. I find that often with world building, starting from, like, the perspective of a viewpoint character can be helpful to, like, start chipping away at what otherwise feels like kind of a monumental task. Like, I guess, like, I personally don't feel that I need to know everything ever about the history of the speculative world in which my story takes place. I just need to know the details that pertain directly to, like, my immediate cast of characters. And because I think I tend to write in, like, a very tight, focused, kind of, like, intimate perspective, even when I'm doing third-person writing, like, I feel like that is often the most natural approach for me, is, like, looking specifically at my characters' biases and how they view their world, and, like, introducing this world to the readers via, like, I guess, like, my character's life in it and the aspects of that world that impact them directly. So that has been what has been most helpful, I think, for me personally so far.
I feel like,
and I apologize, Alexa, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh no, you're good.
With the Glitch Kingdom, because 90% of the world takes place in a world that was actually invented by someone, I think there was a slightly different world building tactic that I had to go through that I actually really loved. So the world was created by one of the characters in the book, who is a game developer. And because of that, all of the different elements reflects where she was when she invented it. So she was grieving her husband. And so death is an aspect of, and grieving is an aspect in the world building in a way that every single culture has a different approach towards death. And that's part of what we go through as we're going through the story. And, like, every element of, like, even the world itself, this is kind of a spoiler, so I probably shouldn't say it, but even the world itself is built to say a message. The continents are built actually in her son's name, which you find out laid on. But it's like, because I went from that approach to it, world building was really character mining. And so this might be an approachable thing. This is kind of how I'm going towards it for my next book is there are gods and goddesses who kind of rule the world. So I'm going to be inventing another world by knowing what the gods and goddesses who are building this world, like why they built it this way. And so like, anyway, it can be a fun approach and a way to show character by delving into the world building. But again, character's the most important.
Yes.
I just want to drop one more thing in there because I've done this before with world building. I think generally speaking, if you are getting lost in the world building and you're getting too deep and you're losing impetus to write the story, it's because for me, it usually comes from a place of fear. And I'm afraid of that first draft and I'm afraid I'm not going to write it well. And there is no good, cheap way to get around it except just to sit down and do it and jump off the cliff and just do it. Because you can't world build your way out of writing that first draft. And it's scary. And it is. And it's okay that you're like nervous about it. But if you can just sit down and start writing it, I'll bet you'll find it again.
I was gonna try to wrap up, but like the questions are really, really good. So out of respect to your guys' time, like how much, like I feel like we should wrap up, but like how are you guys for time?
I got a little bit of time here. My kids just sat down to watch Sesame Street, so I got another probably 30 minutes.
Okay, because I this isn't like with like a virtual event. Like I don't do just 45 minutes or an hour. Like we go long on YouTube, but I want to respect your time. But like okay, a couple of you are writing series, and this is a really good question, one that I cannot address on my channel because I don't write series. This is a great question. Setting up a series. How much do you hold back? How much do you put into the first book because you want to like make it happen? Like how do you balance that? I know that's like the $1 million question.
Yeah. That is tough. Go ahead.
The biggest mistake I made is that with a series is that they always tell you like just focus on that first book and selling that first book because it doesn't matter about book 2 until you sell that book 1. But because of that, I didn't let myself even think about the sequel. And so this is something that I'm still learning because I'm like, oh, I have to figure out what happens next now. And so I think one of the big mistakes that I made is I left myself little nuggets of things that could turn into bigger things, but I didn't think about what those bigger things they could be. So then I had to go back through book 1 and find all those little nuggets and then figure out what they were turning into. And I really wish that I had, when I inserted those little nuggets, had a plan in mind. Now I'm really happy with how everything is coming together, but it took a really long and difficult time to get there. So I think like with series, depending on what kind of series you're doing, because you could have something that's more episodic and like, there's less of an overarching storyline. But if you have like a single storyline, if this is like one story in just 2 or 3 books, I think it's really important to like know where you're going. At least that's where I wish that I had, because I knew where I was going. I just didn't have like, I knew in a broad sense. I didn't know in particular sense. So I think going into my next series, I'm going to be more intentional about making sure that I know in detail where I'm going, so that I know like the little seeds that I'm planting. I know what kind of plants they're going to grow into, because I planted a lot of seeds and then had to invent the plant later.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that. I'm coming from a different like style of writing. I am the hardcore plotter. So from that perspective, I absolutely agree with Lora Beth, is that I had to know where Alyssa Farshot was going to be at the end of the second book. I had to know where she was going to end, where the world around her was going to end. And then it was a matter of figuring out I knew it was going to be 2 books. So where does she need to be at the end of that first book in order to take that second book to the next level? And so a lot of this is going to kind of come in revision. So like the first time you sit down and write the book, you're not going to necessarily have all of the pieces in place. But on the second, third draft or whatever, then I had a clearer idea of, okay, I'm happy with where she ends in this book and the jumping off point that gives me to the second book. What can I go in and seed now that I want her to face in that second book? But so like, where can I drop the little clues, the hints of the bigger bad that's on the horizon? So it's a little bit about knowing what the destination is going to be and then going back and rejiggering the journey to get there in the best way that you can. Now, whether I'm effective at that, nobody's going to know until fall 2021, but that was the general idea.
I think the other tricky thing is you don't always know how many books you're going to get. And so it's hard to plan because, I mean, you don't have a lot of say in how many books are going to be in your series. That's a publishing call, not really an author call. I mean, you can have input, but at the end of the day, it's the publisher that tells you how many books there's going to be. And so I think you also have to kind of plan out, okay, if this is going to be 2 books, what is this going to look like? If it's going to be 3 books, what is this going to look like? If this is going to be a really long series, like what kind of series is this going to be? Is this going to be more episodic? Is it going to be like a single driving factor? So I think you just have to have a lot of different scenarios in your head. Because when you get told like this is how many books it's going to be, you need to be ready for that.
Wonder if it's a little like being a showrunner for like a TV series and not knowing if you're going to get renewed for another season. I mean, like this might be the season finale, but it might also be the series finale. So I got to make it work for both.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Eric Kripke of Supernatural. Looking at you, buddy.
So to kind of like wrap it up, but like in a like with a lot, like prefacing that, because I got a lot of different questions and I had some things on my spreadsheet as well, my outline, to cycle back on the YA sci-fi market. Like we're going to chew on that again because I had some questions that were asking for advice. Like, how do you feel the market is now? What advice do you have to aspiring YA sci-fi writers? Is now a time to query? I mean, I think the answer honestly is it's never a good time to query. It's also always a good time to query. So query. It's both are true at the exact same time. Always. Publishing's weird, but let's talk a bit about like a combination of really advice you'd give for aspiring YA sci-fi writers, YA sci-fi writers, period. And then I'd love to end just talking a bit about where you see YA sci-fi going, our hopes. I think we should be positive and focus on hopes and dreams, and also maybe kicking publishing in the butt a little. So it's a lot. So I guess the easiest to focus on the advice part, maybe starting.
Write what makes you happy. Like write what you want, whether or not there's a market for it. Like be weird, try different things, because like my book is really weird. Like I invented a dialect to put in that book. And it's like a brand new dialect and it's weird. And it was something that I wanted to do because I'm really into linguistics. And it's super weird. You know what? Like some people hate it, some people love it. And you
like, come on.
I think that makes the
do what makes you happy.
Sci-fi too. Like you take your weird and you do it. Yeah.
You commit to it.
Lean into the weird.
Because I think like you have to decide for yourself, like, would you rather write something that you love and then maybe it gets published, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's hard to market, maybe it's not, or would you rather like write things that you don't really care for because there's a market for them? And even then there's no guarantee. So like you could like figure out this formula of what sells well, but there's still like, it's all just chance and which way the wind is blowing, and somebody sneezes, and like it's all just so random. So instead of trying to like control, and this is really hard for me, once you get into publishing, like your control is like gone. So instead of trying to control every little thing, just write what you love, and that's going to come through in your book. And if you love sci-fi, write sci-fi. And if you are done with that book, query it, and just keep writing what you love.
I will say query it with an asterisk. Be very smart about your query. YA Sci-Fi, nothing wrong with saying that, like literally, but just be careful of like the word dystopia. It's a query is packaging. Write the book you love and then package it like in how you promote it, like get some sexy comps in there. You make them love your book. That's my advice. And I said that on a panel once, and there was an author who was a little more old school than me who was like, you shouldn't lie about your book. I'm like, it's not lying. It's putting it in a cute dress.
Marketing.
It's not, it's marketing, right? Marketing is creative storytelling.
Yeah. It's like, well, we can say vampires now, but think about all the years you couldn't say it was vampires. So writers found creative ways to be like, it's not a vampire book, but it is. Or think about I think one of the most brilliant bits of like marketing wavy hands was Red Queen. That is a superpowers book that was sold as a fantasy, and I'm like, slow clap. That was brilliant. That is a sci-fi that they hoodwinked everyone into buying because they made it a fantasy. I'm like, that. I love that. Do that, whatever that. if you have to, because exactly, write the book you love and find a way to do it.
It's like writing a resume. So when I teach my students like writing a resume, like you don't lie on your resume, but you present truth in a way that's going to appeal most to your audience, right? And I think that's what a query is also. You're presenting truth in the way that it would most appeal to your audience.
I'm going to say my advice would be that writing is hard. Finishing a book is really hard. And if you're going to do it because you really want to do it, and do it because you really love the story you want to tell. And I think there was a person named Mercy. Mercy said that they don't know if like they look at books and like they want to write a book, but they don't think it's unique enough. And I think if you love it and you enjoy it, you will find a way that is unique enough. And honestly, I have never read the same book twice. So it's not possible. And you just really need to enjoy what you're doing and go for it. And again, everybody is right. You need to package it properly. And that's really, really important. And then there was another person who said, and I just wanted to get this because it was a weird thing. They said, how do you transition between dialogue and action? And the answer is that your dialogue should always have active tags. Instead of saying like, she said a million times, you could do that. Or you could say, she pulled her hair into a bun, or she did this. Always keep it active so that you're always, the story has movement. And the more movement you have, the more easy it is to transition into like an action scene. So anyway, yeah, that's my advice. Do what you love. Don't try to write for the market because the market is always changing. And I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen next. We don't
has no clue. No clue.
Yeah, and you could write for the market now, but it's going to be different 2 years down the road.
Yeah, because publishing is like fast and slow at the same time. It feels like it takes forever, like waiting to like announce your deals or whatever. But then but trends move like this, right?
Yeah.
Years.
And the book releases move like this. It's like, you're out. We're so excited for your book. It just came out. It was like 2 weeks ago. It's super old. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, we should do a whole conversation about debuting. Like, I warn debuts, like, it's the weirdest phenomenon. It's always 2 weeks, too. It's 2 to 3 weeks where everything crashes, and you're like, oh, okay.
Nobody's telling me I'm pretty anymore. What happened?
Basically, it's like, YA is bonkers. They move on so fast, and you're just like, shrug emoji. It's great. We're all great.
Everything's fine. It's just fine, guys.
Yeah, we're doing great.
That's not an upper. We're supposed to be talking a more upper. I do think
It is an upper though because we keep on going and we're great.
we do.
Yeah.
I do think if you've got like I can't add anything more. Everybody's like, if you've got a passion for it, write it. If you don't think your book is unique because you're like, well, this has been done before. Dude, everything's been done before, but it's not been done by you before. So just write it and have a really good time. And maybe that first book doesn't. I mean, I wrote like a Buffy X-Men urban fantasy book that didn't go anywhere, but I learned something from it. And so, but then the next book did. So like, just write it.
Superpowers book. Boom.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would have to say like get arrested. Like practice. Like I know like practice makes perfect is kind of a cliche. But like, yeah, getting your reps and just like doing a lot of writing, I think will inherently, it's flight time, right? Like it'll inherently teach you more about the craft just because you have so much experience doing it over and over and over again. So if you have something that you're excited to write, like I'd say like, don't even think about like, oh my God, like this needs to be the one, maybe it's the one. Just think about it as like, oh, this is a story I want to tell. Like, and yeah, and let the rest align.
And I think one element that's missing from this conversation is the teens themselves, the people that we write to. Like right now, they are going through periods of isolation that and reliance on technology that we've never approached before. And no one does that like sci-fi. You know, no one can show isolation the way that being on a ship can, you know, like that, all of that. It's so critically important to the readers themselves. And I think a lot of editors who are looking for contemporary and stuff like now, they don't want to discuss the pandemic. And so there's a way that we can really discuss what these teens are going through and let them be reflected. And that is, I think, an opportunity for sci-fi, YA sci-fi right now, that there's like an opening there. So I actually think that sci-fi absolutely could explode because of that.
Absolutely.
We're actually due for another mini trend. So write your book.
Fingers crossed. Fingers
Well,
crossed.
yeah, because it's a whole conversation in YA contemporary is, do we mention the pandemic? Do we not? Do we mention the pandemic? And we, sci-fi, we don't have to follow by those rules. We can mention whatever we want, or we could do an analogy. We don't have to consider that. So
well, pandemics are a very popular sci-fi trope. How many of us had a pandemic in our book? Because I did. And I'm like, you can read it now. Trigger warning.
My favorite book tagline. Yeah, The Fever King by Victoria Lee did a fantastic job with a pandemic plot. If any of you guys read that.
Which one?
Fever King, Victoria Lee.
I have not read it yet, but yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great example, I'd say, of science fantasy. Marketed more as fantasy than sci-fi, but has definite sci-fi elements, like X-Men influences, all of that. But yeah, like really, really excellent, like pandemic plot plus like all of the usual sci-fi fantasy goodness, I should say.
And this Mortal Coil is pandemic too.
Yeah.
I just read Elusive by Emily Lloyd Jones. It's an earlier book of hers, which has had a pandemic and then people get superpowers out of the vaccine. So now the vaccine is rolling out and I'm like, well, I
like superpowers.
What is my super? Right, exactly. But like that was a sci-fi book marketed more as like a heist, which it's both. But like I'm sitting here going like, oh, I'm gonna get a superpower now. Where is that vaccine for me? I mean, yeah.
Well, and something that I think is a theme with all of us that I'll answer my own question to jump off of everything we've been saying. The theme, I think, is resilience. All of us had to write several books.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's the good thing about sci-fi. You love sci-fi. There are so many different types of sci-fi to write. If this trope isn't hitting, try another one. So for me, I burned through time travel, superpowers, and then I wrote a space book. And it just so happened that space was having a moment. But that was like 4 or 5 years. Like it and multiple books. And I think all of us also had to write a couple different books and are still writing lots of different books. So like, if this book doesn't hit, write the next one. You know?
Yep.
So keep writing.
Yeah.
The only thing you can control.
Yep. Yeah. Or also, I also will say, just to throw practical tips out there, with some types of sci-fi, you could also just not write YA and do better in the adult market or middle grade, and that's okay too.
Mhm.
Or even what I find fascinating is certain types of sci-fi will perform in the UK and not in the US.
Oh,
Like it's just marketing. Oh,
Yeah.
the UK will buy a time travel book and the US will not.
Huh.
Like I track that, like, because I wrote one, I like paid attention to the sales, and it depends on the market. Yeah,
That's weird.
it depends. Like the UK, yeah, it's a whole thing. I won't get into a side conversation. Superpowers is a whole other story. I have a lot of feelings about that because I freaking love that trope, and it's really hard to sell. But yeah, I want dystopian to come back, but that's me. Like,
It probably will.
I'll read 8 million books about people living in a bubble. I don't know, because I read all of those.
See, you got to write your id. You got to write your tropes.
Right, and also like back when dystopia was like the big trend during like the late aughts and early 2010s, did we even truly know what a dystopia was? We could go to bars and drink our sorrows. We could see our friends whenever we wanted. Like we had no idea how bad it could get.
Yeah.
That is true.
Sorry, I've like put us back down on the counter.
No, I really am kind of like, but that is the curious question. Sci-fi will never go away. It just has kind of ups and downs, particularly in YA. And I'm excited to see what's next. Because there's going to be a next. Because there has to be a next. I'm like, look at the world we live in. Sci-fi books.
Mm-hmm.
Publish
And
them.
I think the good thing about sci-fi is if you get an agent and you get a book deal, I feel like we said, sci-fi readers are loyal. Like if you hit their tropes, they're gonna come and they're gonna find it and they'll be all like, "This is my shit." Because as a sci-fi consumer, I do. If you put somebody in space on a spaceship and you say that spaceship has feelings, I'm gonna eat all of it up. I'm gonna eat it up so good.
I want to
every time.
I love clone books. Give them to me. Like, publish them. I have so many feelings. It's great.
So the loyalty of the base is there. I think what we find is the loyalty of the base is there. Even if it's smaller, even if it's not always getting all of the same bells and whistles as some of the bigger genres in YA, they continue to publish some every year because the base is still there.
Yeah.
We're small, but we're scrappy.
We are scrappy. I like it.
Yeah, I feel like a traitor because I left, but I'm just waiting. I have a couple of I have sci-fi concepts I was told literally not to bother with, and I'm just waiting.
Same. I want dystopia to come back because I wrote a really, really fun dystopian book, and it's like super twisty, and it's like Nakia and Killmonger if they teamed up.
What?
Oh
And
my
it's like-
God. I want to
will this into existence, Alechia. I'm willing it right now.
And it's like really enemies to lovers to enemies to lovers. And it's just like that kind of cycle over and over again.
Yeah.
And so much death. Like, I cannot believe that I wrote so much death. And it was like super fun for me. And I really want that to come back because that book was like the fastest I ever wrote something. It was super angry. And it was like, and I'm going to have fun. And that's what I did. And it was like one of those visual things where you see like a black girl in a hallway wearing a yellow dress and popping pink bubble gum. And she's about to do some stuff. And you're like, oh, damn, girl, you are in trouble. Everybody is in trouble. That's that book where I had such a great time with it. So I hope that comes back. My hope for the future, though, when it comes seriously, is that everybody gets the representation, that we are able to allow everyone the chance to write books in the genres they want to write in without saying it's dead, without saying it's unmarketable, without saying that we already have one person doing this, so you don't need another. I want to watch everybody get a chance and kind of open the doors to stories that haven't had an easy route getting in and aren't there yet and haven't been done yet. And I want every own voice or any marginalized author to have that chance to get there's stories out there, because I think when you allow people with a totally different perspective and one they know inherently and that they know very, very, very well, and they write it, it is going to blow up because it hasn't been done. It's so unique, and they get to do this in a way that feels so authentic and real. And it's just going to be like one of those moments where you're like, yes. And I'm excited about that. That's my hopes for the genre, is that everybody gets their chance, and we let everybody in. We let people in, and it's like, yes, we're gonna have like a whole revolution within publishing. That's my dream. I don't know if it's gonna happen, but that's my dream.
And paid equally.
Yes, and paid
Yeah,
equally.
that would be nice, right?
Yep. Why generally is for sci-fi, they have to do more. They have to publish more, and they have to market the books.
Yeah.
They got to open seats at the table, bring in new voices, and then support those books. Because I hate the story of, well, it didn't sell. And I'm like, why didn't it sell? Because maybe you didn't market it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, support your authors, create those new voices. And I'm just like, YA has the power to reinvent so many genres, and it has in a lot of cases. Like, we're impacting adult romances now. Adult romances are written like YA now. And I'm like, yeah, they are. And they're bestsellers. Let's do that for sci-fi. Diverse, like, I think, like, we can, because adult sci-fi is not very diverse. Start that in YA and work your way up. I think that's what they should do, but that's just me. Publish more books, publishing. So
Yes.
basically, take risks. I actually think that's the thing. It shouldn't be a risk, but they do see sci-fi as a risk, and they're very risk averse, and they should take more risks on things that might not make them $1 million, but could be a very strong mid-list title, So.
Are they afraid of having mid-list?
Yeah.
Oh, they got rid of the mid-list. The mid-list is decimated. It basically doesn't exist, but I hope it'll come back, because it's so frustrating. The mid-list exists, I should say. The mid-list is more like 10K copies instead of 50K copies. It's just, things have changed. So the good news is that your mid-list, even if you sell less, but they don't nurture the mid-list very well, and that's the problem. So, yeah. So,
Hope.
I think it's a great note to leave it on, that, like, we want change. We want more. Write the book you love. I thought that was an amazing discussion. You can come back to my channel anytime you want. All sci-fi all the time, because now all I talk about is murder. So, like, sci-fi fic. Like, my audience loves science fiction and fantasy, and I'm like, I need to have people on who can talk about things I can't talk about anymore. Thank you. So, pitch your books again. Tell people who you are again. Your book titles, so they can go get them. There are links down below in the description. I linked to IndieBound, and your socials. Tell them where to find you.
I'll start. I'm Sheena Boekweg. You can find me on Twitter at Sheena Boekweg and Instagram at Sheena Boekweg, and also on Facebook at Sheena Boekweg. So my book came out this February is Glitch Kingdom, and it is a story about a bunch of teenagers stuck in a fantasy video game that is breaking down around them. It is ridiculously fun, and it features a fat positive hero. She hits things with axes and gets fallen in love with a handsome prince. It's very fun. And then my next one, what is Sisterhood of Secret Ambitions? I love this cover so much. I literally, you don't even know. It's the most beautiful. Look at it. It is a alternate history set in 1927 about a secret society of women who have chosen the president since John Adams. And it is very inclusive and unapologetically feminist. And it's the story about a bunch of teenage girls whose job it is to make a future president fall in love with them. And it's basically Manchurian Candidate meets Dairy Girls. And it's ridiculously fun. And I can't wait for it. It comes out June 2021. And I'm also a contributor with a YA Sci-Fi story. Again, Fat Positive. In the Fat Positive anthology, everybody shines. So I write big surprising stories about big surprising girls. And you can also find me at boekwegbooks.com. You can see the spelling of my last name right there.
Okay. Rebecca Coffindaffer. I wrote Crown Chasers, which came out this past September. YA space opera about. Sorry, I'm getting weird backlash. A YA space opera about a sassy pilot who gets stuck in a race for a throne that she doesn't want and has to deal with the politics and adventures therein. And its sequel comes out next fall. I can't give away pretty much any information about it yet, except it deals with all of the aftermath of Crown Chasers, and there will be more information coming out about it probably next month in terms of like title, release date, and all that fun stuff. You can find me at RebeccaCoffindaffer.com, on Twitter at CallMeBex, BECKS, and at Instagram at Becca Coffindaffer.
Okay. I left all my books over there because I had to move. So just imagine my cover, I guess.
There you go.
There it is. Yeah. Thank you. My book is about a teen rebel librarian at the end of human rule on Earth, and an alien who loves music and their unlikely friendship relationship on a road trip to possibly save humanity. And it's super fun. Also, body positive. Hey, big girls having big dreams and dramatic adventures. All of mine are, though, so that's not really too surprising. And my next book, okay, that came out February 25th. You can buy that, and it's pretty cool if you want. The other book is The Kindred, which comes out in 2022. I'm not really gonna like do anything for that yet because that's like a while away. So, but I mean, if you want to put it on Goodreads, that'd be pretty cool, I guess. But you don't have to. I'll promote it when it's closer. Yeah, I know. I'm not good at this. Anyway, I also am contributing to Out There. Sandra Mitchell will be putting that together. And that's also in 2022. So that's exciting. You can find me at AleciaDow.com, which is ALECHIADOW.com. And I am at Alechia Writes, ALECHIAWRITES, on Twitter. There you go. And Instagram, which is at Alechia Dow. I'm not gonna spell that for you too. But thank you. Yeah, I have nothing else to say.
I love you so much.
I can't sell myself at all.
I love it.
Man, sorry.
Well done, Alechia.
Go on, Lora Beth. Take it away.
I'm Lora Beth Johnson. My book that came out this summer is Goddess in the Machine. It also features a fat main character. So yes, big girls, big adventures, and a big girl as a goddess. So Coco, please stop. So it is the story about a girl who goes into cryonic stasis and wakes up 1,000 years too late into a society that sees technology as magic and worships her as a sleeping goddess. The sequel is coming out July 2021, and I can't say anything about it without giving away spoilers. So it's more fun. That's about all I can say. I don't have a picture of the cover, but you should definitely go check it out because it's an amazing cover, and it goes really well with this cover. They're going to sit next to my shelf and they're going to be in love, and I love it. And you can find me on Twitter at Lora Beth Writes. But I'm only really on there for updates. But you can find me on Instagram at Lora Beth Johnson, and my website is www.lorabethjohnson.com.
Right. I am Andrea Tang. I wrote Rebel Wing, which came out in, oh gosh, February 2020, which feels like it was forever ago. But yes, this is the story of a sort of an ordinary schoolgirl living in a post-revolutionary near future North America who gets caught up on the wings of political intrigue when she accidentally, in the course of her nefarious book smuggling adventures, imprints on this cybernetic dragon. So it's got elements of cyberpunk. It's got a sort of tongue-in-cheek nod to the early 2010s dystopia tropes. It's got a lot of political intrigue, a lot of love for mecha. So it's a great mix of different sci-fi genre mashups. Its companion novel, Renegade Flight, is out 2021 in March, I want to say, so a few months from now. Go ahead and check that out. I will say that even though it's set in the same universe, I did write it with the intention that it could be read as a standalone. So you can read just Rebel Wing, you can read just Renegade Flight. They take place in the same universe. You see some of the same characters pop up in them, but there are like 12 to 15 years that separate them. So that's been super, super fun. Renegade Flight deals with a lot of the same plot elements as Rebel Wing, except that due to taking place like over a decade in the future, we're kind of dealing with like some of the fallout of what happened in Rebel Wing, which I will not spoil for you, but it is a different kind of plot, different main character, a whole new cast. But still lots and lots of cybernetic dragons having big, epic, high stakes clashes. So that should be fun. And yeah, and on social media, you can find me at atangwrites at Twitter. That's ATANGWRITES. But yeah, no, come say hello. I'm super friendly. Love meeting new people. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Awesome. Seriously, thank you so much. I had a really good time. Everyone had good questions. We could have gone on, but it's better that we don't because I think we're all tired. So everyone go buy their books, go follow them. And thank you so much for joining me.